Here we go. Okay. And just before we get going with this one, I will do a little reminder that the Q4 QPR and evaluation reflection are due next Friday, June 23rd. You have heard other dates, such as the 28th. That is a fake date. There are a couple rumors swirling around. If you are going to struggle to meet that date, please reach out to me as soon as possible so we can figure out what we can do about it. But we really need data in by the 23rd. That allows CPEG a few days to finish going through all the data and reaching out to grantees and asking questions and allowing any resubmit pieces that we need so that we have the full data by the end of the fiscal cycle, which ends the 30th. So June 23rd is the official date. And you'll be seeing a number of reminders about that from me in the next week. Okay, now we can start, Vladka.
Okay, great. So my name is Vladka Kovar, and I am here with Shannon Prey. And by now you probably know us very well. We represent CPEG. And we would like to welcome you to our webinar. And this is a very special webinar because it is the last CPEG webinar of the grant cycle. So we are here to celebrate with you all your successes. And we know there had been many, and there are many. End of the grant cycle should be time to celebrate, but it should also be a time to reflect on what was working well, what wasn't working well, what were the challenges, what approaches worked, what strategies didn't work. And so kind of looking back at what had happened during those 5 years so that you will have a nice starting point, an understanding and focus for the next grant cycle. So we have heard from few of grantees that it might be a little challenging to look at the data in last 5 years and to come up with the conclusions and those lessons learned, especially if somebody wasn't present from the beginning or if the focus of the work shifted. And so that's why we decided to make the topic of today's presentation looking at your data across this 5-year cycle. And as I said, like hopefully, finding some points which are important to learn from and use as a good, strategy building for the future. So with that, I would like to ask Shannon to start the presentation.
Sorry, something's not working on my. And I'll add to what Vladka is saying. You'll see from a bunch of what we're going to go through here that a lot of the things we have you report on is kind of the tiny steps of how to get to where you want to go. Sorry, I've got to there we go. Okay, the small pieces of getting to where you want to go. So I hope you can see this as not just the pieces that we need you to report on, but also how it helps set you up to serve your program and make decisions and stuff looking forward. So our objectives for today: what data are you talking about and where do I find it? Where you should start, evaluating partnerships, and then reporting on the grantee-led evaluation piece. So first up, where is all your data? You should have all your quarterly reports or templates. And if you don't have those, your POC should have a version. And if you need help, CPEG has what you've submitted each quarter. So if you need to access any of those, reach out either to your POC or to us. We're happy to help you find those. The implementation plan for each year that contains goals, the population of interest, your deliverables, the outcomes you're looking for, those different pieces. Again, you should have those for every year. And the logic models we started with at the very beginning of the cycle, looking at the goals, the short-term and long-term outcomes and all those pieces. And any evaluation data you have collected if you've done an evaluation of your project. So let's start with logic models. Vladka?
Yeah, so grantees were asked at the beginning of the grant cycle when they were working on the tobacco-focused community profiles to create logic models for their strategies. And we know that not all strategies or not all grantees created logic models for all the strategies they were working on. But if, again, you might not have been present in the beginning of the grant cycle, looking back at those logic models might be helpful to see what was intended, what the plan was, what the activities were, what the outcomes, the short-term and intermediate outcomes were envisioned. And so finding that logic model, you should have it, we should have it, or your POCs should have it. So in case you think this could be a good resource to look back to, you can contact us and we can help you to find it. We have an example of the logic model on the next slide. This is a hypothetical logic model for the tobacco-free schools created by hypothetical grantee using our evaluation module. And at the time, STEPP used the terminology, the project flow diagram, but it is, what is widely known as logic model, and you can see the inputs and the outcomes. So looking at those outcomes, especially the intermediate, because they do coincide with the end of the grant cycle, this grantee wanted to accomplish in 9 schools, that they would complete a tobacco-free schools checklist and implement the second chance curriculum. So again, you see what was intended, and then you can crosswalk that with what was actually accomplished and see if there are any discrepancies, if this actually happened, and then if it has not, then kind of try to examine like what happened that the goal has not been achieved, and that would give you some information about what could have been done differently, and again that could inform your future work. So that's a good starting point. Also, I made a note in there that starting in the next grant cycle, those intermediate outcomes based on the CDC key outcome indicators would be used for grantee-led evaluations to see the progress on the strategies. But we will talk about that more in the future. I just want to make the comment here so that you know what is coming. So we can move to the next slide.
So another place you can start is your implementation plan. Again, that contains goals, population of interest, deliverables, and outcomes. So you're starting with your original implementation plan from FY 2019. Again, you'd have 5 of those then for the 5 years. Maybe 4, I don't remember exactly how the COVID year changed the cycles. But we can look at what was the goal and did you get there? Who was the target audience? Did you serve them? If not, why not? These are kind of the questions we need to ask. And what was the fidelity to the evidence base? So what had you selected was in your logic model as this is where we're going, this is why we're doing what we're doing? How closely were you able to implement your project next to that? And then how did that affect your project outcomes? If you were not able to implement A, B, C exactly, did that affect outcome Q or whatever that is? And sometimes I think we think of evaluation as just the numbers and are we hitting this? And what all this is looking at is the process of what you did and how close you came to what you set out to do. So that's if we start with the implementation plans. You could also start with your QPR. I'm going to give this one to Vladka.
Yes, so if you can please move to the next slide. So as you know, you're asked by CPAC and STEPP to submit the quarterly reports of your progress, and those are based on the framework progress reporting. The framework which you are familiar with, has 9 steps, and they are also divided into 3 strata: preparation, initiation, and action. And so looking at what has been reported by your colleagues or by you throughout those 5 years might help you to determine like what how the progress took place. Were there any obstacles? Did it go smoothly? And so examining those scores submitted based on the framework is another easy way to look at the data across all 5 years. We just want to make sure that we repeat what we said before. We know this is not a linear process, even though the formatting of that framework kind of suggests that, but that's not the case. We know that sometimes things go forward, and sometimes, for different reasons, you might have to take a step back, and that's perfectly fine. So we want to show you an example of looking at the scores across a few quarters. So this is pretty much just for 2 years, but you can see that or get the data for all 5 years and see how the scores were reported. And so how do you decipher this is that you can see that this strategy of tobacco-free schools has been implemented in 3 settings. Here we call them School 1, School 2, School 3. And again, based on the framework, which the 3 strata are, those 9 steps. So first 3 steps of the preparation, which is identifying the partners, investigating the current situation, and then providing education and resources for the first school has been accomplished in like 3 quarters or 4 quarters in a year. And then some initiation, which means mobilization of the community, assessing decision maker support, and then reviewing, revising, and proposing intervention or program or policy has been almost accomplished as well. But then that stopped because no action was taken. So there was no implementation or enforcement. So this kind of data would tell you, okay, something has happened there. Like, why did this not proceed? So if you have more questions, this is a starting point, and then you can go back to the narrative of the progress reporting and see what were the challenges, why this didn't continue, and so on and so forth. The same for School 2, School 3. Based on this table, you can determine that the setting 3 was added later on, and it's a work in progress. So this is just how you interpret the data very quickly, just looking at those scores. What can also happen, and that's on the next slide, is that the scores can be put into like a visual representation of the progress of the work. So here you can, again, very quickly determine how far in each of those strata the work progressed, and also looking at it backwards, like on the red areas, you can easily see like how much work still needs to happen. The difference between the table and this graph is that the graph is pretty much just cross-sectional. So that at this moment, this is how much work happened. In the table, you can actually see how the work progressed and what time it started, what quarter it was concluded, and all those details. But both of the visual representations are great for a quick review of the efforts throughout the 5 years. Another source of kind of looking back at what has been accomplished are your success stories. So we ask or encourage grantees to report their successes every quarter. Not everybody does, and not everybody does every quarter, but there are a lot of success stories, and every year we read all of them. We determine themes, and then we select representative stories and put them together in a report to STEPP. So this is another source for if you haven't been there from the beginning of the grant cycle, you can see what had happened. And even if you were, it's a nice way to remind yourself what has been accomplished.
So another place we can start is with the evaluation data. And this could be that is if you were funded as a strategy level grantee, you were required to do an evaluation of one of your strategies that you're working on over the last 5 years. So you should have this information, the evaluation question and design, even if it shifted a little bit over the time. If you were a foundational level grantee, you may not have been required to do this, but I know that a lot of foundational level grantees were doing some evaluation somewhere in there. So either way, you can be using this kind of information. You can start with, what was your evaluation question and design? You started out the cycle looking at what you were working on and what you wanted to know, and everyone picked some kind of evaluation question, what they wanted to know from what they were doing. And CPEG helped work through the design of all those so that we had questions to be answered and knew what kind of data we would need to collect. So hopefully you have been following along with that, and you'll have the question and design. And again, this information may live in your QPR or templates because you reported it to us. So the question becomes, did you collect the data to answer the question or questions that you had? And what does this tell you? Pretty straightforward. Here's the question. Here's how we designed it. Even if you shifted a little bit in how you implemented any of those pieces, what data did you come out with? Are you able to answer the question? And what does that tell you about what you wanted to know in the first place? So then that's kind of all the data and where that exists and where you can find those different pieces. As Vladka said, especially if you were not here in the beginning of the 5-year cycle, a lot of grantees have a lot of turnover over time, so if you want to go back and acquaint yourself with all the things that happened to be able to look forward and make these decisions about what's going to happen next. In terms of this, the grantee-led evaluation, in the QPR email that you received from me on June 1st, there were 2 links. The first one is to the QPR itself with all of the normal QPR stuff that you report on, with that annual block that asks a handful of extra questions about your biggest accomplishments and your key challenges and how you manage those. The second, and that is due from, that's the one that, well, they're both due from everyone on June 23rd. The second link is also due June 23rd, and it is the grantee-led evaluation or evaluation reflection, kind of, that's what we're terming it. Even if you were not a strategy level grantee and you're not required to do an evaluation, we do ask that you go in and go ahead and click into that one, enter your 6-digit user ID to log in. And the first question is, did you do an evaluation or not? And if no, you'll go directly into submit, boom, submit, you're done. That is the end of your required reporting for this. If you were a grantee who indicates you did do an evaluation, the next part is it'll bring up all the different strategies you've been reporting on over the last 5 years. And you can select which or multiple, of those you did do an evaluation on, and then you'll have the chance to go through and answer questions on all of those. So that's how that is set up. If you did not do an evaluation, you still need to click into that reporting link and go ahead and click no, we didn't do it, and submit. And that is the required reporting that you have for that. Okay. But what the evaluation report is going to ask for is for you to reflect on these 4 questions. 1, briefly describe the project, the focus of your evaluation. And again, you can cut and paste this directly from your evaluation plan. Thinking of the work you have accomplished during this grant cycle, please describe 3 of the most significant findings of this evaluation. How has your organization used the findings from this evaluation, and how might these findings inform future efforts in this field? And we're looking for some specific examples there. And what, if anything, would your organization change about your tobacco work in terms like your intervention or policy focus, the methods you use, the population of interest, anything else, as you're moving forward because of the lessons you learned through this evaluation? So we're going to break those down a little bit more. So describe your focus of the evaluation. From your implementation plan, again, you have the question you started with and what data did you start with or know you wanted to collect. That's where you're going to start with that one. From your QPRs, that evaluation section of the QPR, what happened after X and Y, then Z happened? That's what you want to describe. All 4 of these questions are narrative sections, so we really allow you to describe all the different pieces you want to have in there as you go through. And then evaluating the process. Again, the question of your fidelity to the evidence base. You started with, this has been demonstrated to work. That is why we are going to do it. How closely were you able to implement your project along the lines of what the evidence said would work? Any discussion of the changes that you had to make because of COVID or the population or whatever it was. And then again, those outcomes of interest. What were we looking at to start with? Looking at the 3 most significant findings from this evaluation, we want you to remember that most significant means most significant to your program. It's not that P equals 0.05, anything like that. What did you find out that is really important or demonstrates the need for your program or anything along those lines? What did you find that means something to what you're doing? That is the significance of what we're looking for here. And based on your questions and design, what were you able to determine? Is it that you found that you didn't have enough power to find anything? You didn't have enough manpower to implement something? You didn't have enough buy-in from the community? Any of those things, looking at your evaluation and what was coming up next. How have you used the findings from this evaluation, and how might these findings inform future efforts in this field? So have you used the data or your experience to inform anything else in terms of like next steps or future focus for the program? What you need to do next? We got through ABC, but now we need to do D and E to really get this in there and hammer it home. Is there anything that should be shared out from your findings? Do you need to disseminate information or how you did it and things like that? Do you need to present either on a community call or a grantee call or within your community or at a conference or anything like that? Or even do you need to publish what you found from all of this? It's just kind of things that you can be thinking about. And then also not just the findings, but also the methods and approach. There's a lot of grantees or people in similar positions across the state and country looking to do the same things we're trying to do. Or were you successful or super unsuccessful using or implementing anything? Did you have some novel methods that need to be shared out with other people so that they can use it? Was the approach, so that's spelled wrong, sorry. Was the approach so good that you totally knocked it out of the park? Or was it like really close, but we would change this, and this? Again, is there something you need to share, whether it's among the STEPP grantees or on a bigger stage, presenting at a conference or something like that, or even something that needs to be published? So you should be thinking about within that. And then what would you change moving forward? In the work you were doing, what should, would, could you change? Is it the policy work and focus? Were you thought you needed to go down path A, but really you needed to be at path like A.5? Is it partnerships? Are the partnerships you're working with awesome, or do they need some rehab? We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Were you serving or reaching the target population, or are there some things that need to be changed so that you are serving or reaching the target population? Again, that's a huge lesson learned that comes out of that. We totally got in and worked with the people we wanted to work with and made a huge impact, or we got part of the way there, but we think this, and this would help us really get in there more. Those kinds of things. the approach that you took in general, does that work? Did that not work? Anything like that? Would you change? How would you adapt it going forward? And then time and effort spent in a specific direction. I know that I personally always have the outlook of like, this will take me like 3 hours, and like 25 hours later, it's actually happened. You need to know those things. You need to know that, well, we only budgeted for this much time and it actually took this much effort to get that there. And so looking forward, we would change how we allocate some of those kinds of things. So those are all the pieces of looking at this evaluation reflection, and hopefully that helps you piece together the different pieces you would use in there. And again, even if you were not required to do an evaluation, but you did, we'd love to hear your take on these different pieces, what you did, how you would improve it. And if you were a strategy level funded grantee, you're required to do this. So we hope that you can go through and reflect on these different pieces of what you did or were able to. And if you got way off the rails at some point, I know a lot of LHA specifically had their questions and evaluation questions and design at the very beginning. And then things change, especially since we ended up over 5 years and with COVID and all the things. So if yours got off the rails a little bit and you need to kind of come back and look at your data and say, okay, so maybe we were at the front thinking this is what we were going to evaluate, but looking from the back, this is the data we have, this is what we can look at, this is the process we can discuss, all those things in our evaluation. That still works as an evaluation. It's not as preferred as starting at the front, but it can absolutely still work. And if you need any help with that, reach out to us. That's what we're here for. So next we're going to look at evaluating partnerships.
Yes, so as we were preparing this presentation, we just realized that we are asking you to reflect on the partnerships, but we never, during those 5 years, really discuss how you can evaluate partnership. And I will read the quote above. It says, like, if partnerships are to be successful, they must have a clear purpose, add value to the work of the partners, and be carefully planned and monitored. And I'm going to show you or present a tool which has been developed by organization in Australia, which is very much similar to STEPP. And they came up with this really concise and user-friendly tool to look at the partnerships and see where partnership is, and if it needs any adjustments, making sure that there is mutual understanding of the goals, mutual understanding of the processes, and all of those important things to make sure that the partnership is healthy and working well. So based on the QPR data, we see that grantees spend a lot of time on building the partnerships, but then also, again, back to the linearity, we know that this is a very fluid concept because partnerships do, as other relationships, they do change because personal change, because the focus of the work changes, and so it is very important to re-examine those partnerships, because they are crucial for the success of the not just public health, but definitely for the success of public health programs and efforts. And so it is needed to periodically reassess the state of the partnerships and ensure that the agendas are aligned and there is the mutual understanding. And then also, you shouldn't be doing it on your own, because asking partners for feedback throughout the process really helps to avoid potential misunderstandings and tensions. So including the partners in this kind of assessment of where the partnership is very important. So we can move to another slide, which will give you the link to that particular tool. Again, it's very straightforward, and it doesn't really take a lot of time to go through all the steps to come to the conclusions. So I just put the activities on the next slides. If Shannon, if you wouldn't mind to go to the next one. So the tool talks also about how you go or should go about establishing the partnerships, but we will leave that part out and pretty much just talk about evaluating the state of the partnership. And this tool calls for 3 different activities. It is very flexible. You can do all 3 of them. You don't have to, you can just pick and choose. And you can also do the activities as an organization on your own, or you can do it together with your partners, or you can do it separately, you and your partners, and then compare the results. So either way works. But the first activity is to assess the purpose of partnership, to make sure that everybody has a clear understanding of what each one can contribute. And the way to assess that by this tool is that each participant is asked to answer those 2 questions, come up with 5 answers for each, and then rank them based on the importance. So you then would look at the answers, starting with the most important, and see if there is alignment or if there are discrepancies, because again, the discrepancies will tell you or uncover what it is that needs to be re-examined, what needs to be worked on, so that everybody has a mutual understanding or the same understanding of the goals and the processes. So that's the first step. So again, as you can see, it's pretty straightforward and shouldn't take that long. The next step, the next activity they call for is mapping of the partnership. So it's pretty much listing all of the partners and then linking them based on the relationship or the strength of the relationship. And then also provide some examples of that relationship, not the assumed or wished for or future examples of how things should work, but what is really going on now, so that this can be examined in the present. So the levels of the partnership which are pointed out in this tool are networking, coordinating, cooperating, and collaborating. So you can see that they do recognize that not all partnerships have to be on the level of collaboration, which is the highest level. So for networking, they are talking about organizations who only exchange information. For coordinating, this relationship is between organizations which do share information, but also alter activities for a common purpose. The cooperating adds on the top of it also sharing resources, and then collaboration is when the organization actually delegates part of their work to another agency. So again, this is a nice way to kind of look at the global partnership situation, see how it looks, and then determine where there might be still gaps if everybody understands what is expected from each other. And again, it can be done by just your organization and then presenting it to the partners, or it can be done by both and then comparing it all as a group activity, which would also strengthen the relationship based on working together on activity like that. And the third activity is a little more detailed. It presents a checklist, and the checklist is organized into 7 domains. Under each domain, there are a few questions, and based on those questions, you can determine a score, which then tells you if your relationship still needs some work or if it's at a good state. And the domains, as you can see, look into like the need of the partnership, choosing partners, making sure that the partnership works. Is the planning process well established? Is the implementation of the collaborating action going on smoothly? Is there any mechanism for minimizing the barriers to partnership? And then reflecting on the continuing of the partnership. So that pretty much refers to sustainability. So on the next slide, I put a screenshots of some of the checklist questions. So for example, for determining the need for the partnership, you can see that they do ask, like, is there a clear goal for the partnership, or for example, the perceived benefits of the partnership outweighs the perceived cost. And then you can see how it's ranked from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and then the scores are added together, and then based on the total score, you can see where your partnership is. But even just looking at the scores itself, you can definitely see the outliers. And if you see an outlier, then I think the question is warranted, like, what do we do about this? So if you determine that most of the participants would say that there is no clear goal for the partnership, then you know that's something you should be working on for the health of that relationship. So I really think there are different tools to assess the state of partnerships, but I find this one very helpful, again, very well designed and to the point, so you don't have to spend a lot of time, even though you still have to put the time and effort into it. But I think you can come up with very clear ideas, like what it is that still needs to happen. So with that, we can kind of conclude this presentation with saying, like, okay, so you looked into all those data. You probably by now have a good idea about what happened, why it didn't happen. But if you still needed a little more concise evaluation tool for that, we created a bridge assessment, which we have presented in the past, but I just want to remind you it's there if you needed it. Again, on the next slide, there is an example of that tool. So you could start with the logic model, or you could start with your implementation plan, and then ask yourself few basic questions, like, is this activity or input still, essential? Has that been already established or accomplished? If yes, is it sustainable? If not, would it be still easy to accomplish? And then briefly describe what still needs to happen. And again, you don't have to use this tool entirely. You can just pick and select, like, what are the questions you have, and use that for just a quick review. So if anybody wanted to look into it and use it, we are here for you and we can help you with that. But with that, I would like to give it back to Shannon for the conclusion. And thanks for your participation.
So we kind of want to just come back and say, we hope that this helps you, even if you don't have to do the evaluation reflection piece or whatever, that the data that you've been collecting, that you've been reporting over the last 5 years, in terms of your QPR, back to those logic models, all those pieces, we hope will help you. And we hope this presentation helps you kind of be able to look at all of that and say, okay, what are the next steps? What do we need to do? So even if you're not required to do the evaluation or something like that, that you can take your data and see that it's bigger than just what you are required to report to STEPP, but that it's actually hopefully going to help you look forward into, like, the decisions you need to make. And again, not going back to start again at step A, but saying, we've done step A, B, and C. How can we do D, E, F this next cycle? How can we start here and see where we can go from there? Because we already know these things about what we've been doing. We already have this experience. We already have evaluated or looked at and considered our data in that way. So hopefully you can take this and be able to look forward into the next part, and that will all come together and help you there. So that said, are there any questions?
This is Melanie. The
Melanie.
scores that you mentioned at the beginning,
Yes.
are those on the printout or whatever our POCs actually get?
They would be on there, yes. They are also in the, if you downloaded your data or if you requested your data download from me, they're in there as well, yes.
And that's a special request from you then.
Yeah, just let me know if you need those and I can pull them for you.
Okay, for like all 5 years.
Yep, just tell me that's what you need and I can do it.
Okay, thank
No
you.
worries. Yes, of course. In terms of putting it into a spreadsheet and being able to look at it, that is for you to do, but I can pull you the scores so that you have all of those of what you've reported.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Anyone else? I have talkers on here. I know you have some questions. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop my recording.